The rain had softened to a drizzle in Abuja, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth under the Woos flyover, where the city's heartbeat pulsed through honking Okadas and the chatter of evening hawkers. In a shadowed corner, where puddles caught the flicker of streetlights, a small girl stood, her bare feet sinking into the damp asphalt beside a silver Mercedes that gleamed like a promise she could never touch. Chinwe, just 10, was a wisp of a child, her faded blue dress clinging to her thin frame, her eyes deep pools of sorrow that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. She clutched a tattered cloth, its edges frayed from night spent as her blanket under the flyover's cold concrete. With careful strokes, she wiped mud from the car's door, her movements tender, as if the vehicle were a fragile hope she could polish into reality. Inside, Tunde Adebayo, a tech billionaire whose apps powered millions of lives, sat in the driver's seat. He sat in the driver's seat, his phone forgotten. He had parked here to take a call, but now his phone lay forgotten as he watched the girl through the tinted window. Something about her held him, her focus, her trembling hands, the way her face, streaked with rain and silent tears, seemed to mirror a pain he'd long buried. Then he saw it, a crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist, faint but sharp, identical to the one on his own wrist, a mark he thought was his alone. His heart stuttered, memories of his late mother flashing her stories of family, of signs, in the skin that tied them to destiny. For 15 minutes, he sat motionless, the world outside fading as he studied Chinwe's delicate frame, her determination battling the exhaustion in her slumped shoulders. She didn't notice him, her world narrowed to the car's mud-streaked door, each wipe a plea for her mother's survival. Tun's life was one of control boardrooms, algorithms, wealth, but this moment stripped him bare, leaving only a man haunted by a mark and a child's quiet strength. He stepped out, the drizzle cool on his face, and softened his voice. To not startle her, "Why are you cleaning my car?" Chinwe froze, her hands clutching her chest, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. "It was dirty, sir. I just wanted to help." Her voice was small but steady, cutting through the hum of the city. Tun crouched to her level, noticing the dirt smudged on her cheeks, the way her lips quivered, but her gaze held firm. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of Naira notes, enough to feed a family for months. "Take this," he said. But Chinwe shook her head, her knees hitting the wet ground with a soft thud. "Please, sir, I don't want money. My mother, she's in the hospital, very sick. The doctors say she has 1 day left unless I pay. My father's gone. I have no one else." Her voice broke, tears spilling down her face, each drop a plea that pierced Tun's heart. He saw his younger self and her alone after his mother's death, scrabbling for meaning in a world that felt too big. Tun's gaze lingered on her wrist, his decisiveness faltering. Her pain echoed his own losses, the years he'd spent building walls of wealth to shield himself from grief. Chinwe's hands trembled, clutching the cloth as if it held her mother's life. Tun paused, his voice softening as he opened the car door. Compassion, or perhaps recognition. "Get in," he said, opening the car door, his voice gentle but firm. Chinwe hesitated. Her feet hesitated above the seat, unaccustomed to such warmth, her eyes searching his for a trick. But there was no deceit in Tun's gaze, only a quiet resolve and a question he couldn't voice. She climbed in, her small body sinking into the seat, the car's warmth a stark contrast to the cold she'd known for years. Tun slid behind the wheel, the engine's low hum filling the silence as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was a map of hardship, yet her chin lifted with a stubborn hope that made his chest ache. The birthmark, her tears, her plea for her mother, it all wove into a mystery that felt like fate. As he pulled onto the road, the flyover fading. Behind them, Tun's mind raced with questions. Who was this girl? Who was her mother? And why did that mark feel like a key to a past he'd left behind? The hospital was their destination, but the journey, he sensed, would lead to truths far greater than he could imagine. 3 days earlier, Chinwe sat beneath the flyover, her arms around her mother, Adaze, whose feverish body trembled under a thin shawl. 2 years ago, Amika, her father, was killed in a hit-and-run, leaving them homeless. Now, Adize's anemia and heart condition demanded surgery costing 12 million naira, an impossible sum. Chin whispered, "Mummy, I'll find the money." Her voice fierce, but Adize's weak smile held little hope. Chinwe sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand, whispering, "Mummy, don't leave me. I'll find the money. Just wait." Adize's eyes fluttered, too weak for words, but a tear slipped down her cheek, her love for her daughter stronger than her fading body. Back in the present, Chinwe sat in Tun's car, her wet clothes sticking to the leather, her muddy feet tucked under her as if to hide her shame. The dashboard glowed softly, and the faint scent of Tun's cologne mixed with the car's polished interior, a world so alien it made her dizzy. She stole glances at him, his strong jaw set, his hands steady on the wheel. He asked, "Where's?" "The hospital?" And she gave the address in a whisper, her voice nearly lost in the engine's hum. Tun drove in silence, his mind a storm of questions about the girl in his back seat and the birthmark that linked them. At the hospital, guards straightened when they saw his Mercedes, and nurses whispered as he walked in, Chinwe trailing behind, her rags stark against his tailored suit. They reached Adize's ward, and Chinwe froze at the sight of her mother, pale as moonlight, tubes snaking from her arms to machines that beeped like a countdown. Tun's breath caught Adize, looked like a ghost of someone he once knew, her features tugging at a memory he couldn't place. He turned to the doctor, his voice firm. "Do the surgery. I'll pay." Chinwe's eyes widened, hope flickering where despair had rooted. As the doctor nodded and hurried off, she sank into a plastic chair outside the ward, clutching her cloth like a lifeline. Tun sat beside her, his presence steady but quiet, his mind racing with questions about her past. Why did it feel like fate had led him to this moment? Chinwe glanced at him, her small hand reaching out, then pulling back, unsure. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Tun only nodded. He nodded, his gaze steady but troubled, but the weight of her gratitude and her mother's fight bound him to them in ways he couldn't yet understand. In the hospital's sterile ward, Chinwe sat curled in a plastic chair, her locket star etching cool against her fingers, eyes fixed on the doors where Adize had been wheeled for surgery. Tun sat beside her, a quiet anchor. When the doctor announced the surgery's success, Chinwe's sob broke the silence, her arms wrapping around Tun. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, tears soaking his shoulder. He nodded, his gaze steady, but troubled. Later, in the quiet of his sleek office, Tun pulled a faded photo from a locked drawer, a snapshot from a university festival 11 years ago. A young woman in a yellow dress laughed under fairy lights, her eyes bright, her smile unforgettable. Adize. He hadn't known her long, just one night of shared stories and stolen moments before he left for his master's in London, never seeing her again. But now, her face matched the frail woman in the hospital bed, and Chinwe's birthmark felt like a thread pulling him back to that night. He paced, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, then made a call to a private lab, his voice. "Lo, I need a DNA test. Urgent. I'll send a sample." He'd noticed a hairbrush Chinwe left on the hospital chair, and with careful hands, he'd taken a strand, his heart pounding with the weight of what it might reveal. Back at the hospital, Adize was stable but weak, her eyes fluttering open to see Chinwe sleep beside her, head resting on the bed. Tun stood at the door, watching them, his mind racing. Could Chin be his daughter? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, a crack in the life he'd built. He arranged for their discharge, refusing to let them return to the flyover. Instead, he drove them to his mansion in Matama. The mansion's gates loomed, a world apart from the flyover. Chinwu's eyes widened at the sight of chandeliers and polished floors, her bare feet hesitant on the cool tiles, as if she might soil this dream. Adaze, still frail, leaned on Tun's arm, her voice soft with protest. "This is too much, sir. We can't stay here." But Tun's tone was firm, his eyes kind. "You've suffered enough. Let me do this." Chinwe clung to her mother's hand, her locket dangling, its star catching the light. She felt like an intruder in this palace. Yet Tun's quiet gestures, a glass of juice placed before her, a blanket draped over her shoulders, carried a warmth she hadn't known since Emeka's hugs. Tund watched her, noting the way her fingers traced the locket, the way her eyes held both fear and resilience. He saw Adi's exhaustion, her pride warring with gratitude, and his heart tugged with memories of that festival night, her laughter, her spark, now dimmed by years of hardship. As they settled into guest rooms, Chin whispered to Adaze, "Mommy, is this real?" Adaze squeezed her hand, her voice a faint thread. "It's real, my love. For now." Tund lay awake that night, the lab's promise of results looming like a storm. The birthmark, Adaze's face, Chinwu's eyes, they wove a story he wasn't ready to read, but couldn't ignore. He felt a pull to protect them, to rewrite their pain, even as he braced for a truth that might unravel his carefully ordered world. The Matama mansion was a cocoon of quiet luxury, its high ceilings and soft lights a world away from the flyover's grime. But for Chinwe, the polished floors felt like ice under her bare feet, each step echoing her fear that this new life might vanish. Adaze, still weak but gaining color, sat in a plush guest room, her eyes tracing the silk curtains as if they held answers to the guilt she felt for accepting Tun's help. Chinwe, clutching her star-etched locket, hovered near her mother, her heart heavy with gratitude, yet shadowed by the strangeness of this man who'd saved them. Tund, meanwhile, sat in his study, the DNA test results glaring from his laptop. Screen, 99.9% paternity confirmed. His hand shook, the glass of water on his desk untouched as the truth sank in. Chin was his daughter. The crescent birthmark, a fleeting memory of Adaze's laughter under festival lights, now bound him to a child he'd never known. His mind spiraled back to that night 11 years ago, a whirlwind of youth and possibility, cut short when he left for London, unaware of the life he'd left behind. He needed to tell them, but how? The weight of it pressed against his chest. As he walked to Adi's room, his steps slow, his usual confidence replaced by a man's vulnerability. He found her alone, Chinwe napping in the next room, and his voice was soft but steady. "Adaze, we need to talk." Her eyes met his wary, as if she sensed the storm coming. He showed her the results, his finger tracing the birthmark on his wrist. "Chinwe's mine, isn't she?" Adize's breath hitched, her hands covering her mouth as tears welled. She nodded, her voice breaking. "I found out I was pregnant after you left. I was engaged to Emeka. He knew the truth but chose to raise her as his own to spare me shame." Tund sat, stunned, his mind painting Emeka as a man of quiet honor, a father who'd given Chin love when he could have turned away. Adi's tears fell faster. "I never told her. I didn't want her to feel less than Emeka's." Tund's heart ached, but he saw Chinwe's silhouette in the doorway, awake, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" she whispered, her locket slipping from her fingers to the floor. Tund knelt before her, his voice gentle. "Chinwe, I'm your father. I didn't know until now." Her face crumpled, betrayal flashing in her eyes. Emeka was her daddy, the man who'd sung her to sleep who'd carried her on his shoulders through Abuja's dusty streets. She backed away, her voice a hiss. "You're lying." Before Tund could speak, she ran, her bare feet slapping the marble, out to the garden where the night air swallowed her sobs. She sank onto the stone steps, hugging her knees, the stars above blurring through her tears. Amaka's laughter, his warm hands, his sacrifice in that hit and run, it was all she'd known of a father. How could this stranger, this man in a suit, claim that bond? Inside, Adaze paced, her hands trembling. "I should have told her sooner," she whispered, guilt choking her words. Tund stood by the window, watching Chin's small form under the garden's fairy lights, his heart breaking. "She needs time," he said, his voice low. "No child should face this." Adaze nodded, wiping her eyes, but her fear lingered. Had she lost her daughter's trust? Tund didn't push, though every instinct urged him to hold Chinwu, to explain. Instead, he acted quietly, enrolling her in an elite school, its green lawns and bright classrooms a world she'd only dreamed of. He hired a therapist, a kind woman who visited discreetly, helping Chinwu navigate the storm of her identity. Each morning, he left a tray outside her door, fresh fruit, warm bread, a note in his neat handwriting. "You're stronger than you know. I'm here." Chinwu didn't speak to him, her silence a wall, but she kept the notes, stacking them under her pillow, their words sinking into her heart. She watched Tund from afar, saw how he spoke gently to the maids, how he sat with Adaze, coaxing smiles from her tired face. Her anger softened, but the hurt lingered. She kept his notes under her pillow, her heart softening despite the ache for Amika. Tund, too, wrestled with his new reality, his nights spent staring at that old festival photo, Adi's smile haunting him. He'd built an empire, but missed a daughter's first steps, her laughter, her pain. As Chinwu slept under his roof, her locket gleaming on the nightstand, Tund vowed to earn her trust, not as a billionaire, but as a father, even if it took years. Chinwu's new room in Tund's Matala mansion was a haven of soft blues and sunlight, but she spent her days by the window, her star-etched locket dangling from her fingers. She clutched her locket, torn between this new warmth and Amaka's memory. She watched Tund from a distance, his quiet gestures slipping a new school bag into her room, leaving notes with her breakfast tray chipping away at her walls. His words, "You're braver than you know," lingered in her mind, and though she still flinched at his smile, she began to notice his kindness. The way he listened to the maid's stories or ensured Adi's medicine was always on time. Adaze, her strength returning, glowed again, her laughter echoing through the mansion as she and Tund shared quiet moments over tea, their conversations weaving memories of that long-ago festival night. Chinwu saw it, the spark in her mother's eyes, the way Tund's hand lingered near hers, and it stirred both hope and unease in her chest. At school, her new uniform crisp and her classmates' chatter alien, Chinwu excelled, her mind sharp, despite the weight of her emotions. The therapist's gentle questions helped her name her pain. Amaka's love was her truth, but Tund's presence was no lie. One evening, tasked with a school project to draw her family, Chinwu hesitated, her crayons hovering over the page. Then, slowly, she sketched 3 figures. Adi's warm smile, herself holding her locket, and Tund, his crescent birthmark visible, standing tall beside them. She folded the drawing, her heart racing, and slipped it under Tund's study door. When he opened it, his breath caught the childish lines, held a trust he hadn't dared hope for. He found her in the garden, her eyes shy but steady, and knelt beside her. "This is beautiful, Chinwu," he said, his voice thick. She nodded, whispering, "You can keep it." That moment cracked something open, and over weeks, Chinwu's silence thawed. She joined Tund for movie nights, giggling when he dozed off during her favorite cartoons, her small hand brushing his as she passed him popcorn. Adaze watched, her heart swelling, and one night, as fireflies danced outside, Tund took her hand. "Adaze, I've never forgotten you," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Let's raise her together, as a family. Marry me." Adaze's gasp was soft, her eyes brimming with tears, but her nod was sure. "Yes," she whispered, her heart daring to dream again. Chinwu, overhearing from the hallway, felt a rush of joy tinged with fear. Her family was growing, but could she fully let Tund in? The school's annual awards ceremony arrived, a grand event under Abuja's starlit sky, with banners fluttering and parents beaming. Chinwe, in a simple white dress, stood backstage, her heart pounding as her name was called for academic excellence. She stepped forward, her locket gleaming under the spotlights, her voice steady as she thanked her teachers, her mother, and, hesitantly, Tund. The crowd clapped, unaware of the journey behind her poise. As she stepped down, the host's voice boomed again, calling Tund and Adaze to the stage. Chinwa froze, her breath shallow as they walked up hand in hand, their faces radiant. Adaze took the microphone, her voice trembling but clear. "We're here to celebrate Chinwu, but also to share our joy we're getting married." The crowd erupted, cheers washing over Chinwe like a tide. She stood rooted, her eyes wide, tears spilling as the weight of their words hit her mother, happy. Tund, her father, claiming them both. Adaze reached for her, pulling her into a hug, whispering, "You made this possible, my love." Tund joined them, his arms encircling them both, and Chinwe let herself lean into him, her heart finally bridging the gap between Emeka's memory and Tund's love. The stage lights blurred through her tears, but for the first time, she felt whole, her family no longer a broken sketch but a living, breathing truth. As they stepped off the stage, photographers snapped, capturing a moment that would headline Abuja's papers: a billionaire, a once homeless mother, and their daughter, united by love. Chinwu clutched her locket, Emeka's star still her anchor. But now she saw Tund's birthmark as part of her story, a mark of a future she was ready to embrace. The wedding day dawned with a golden haze over Abuja's coastline, the beachside venue alive with silk canopies in ivory and coral, swaying to the rhythm of traditional drummers in vibrant agbada. Chinwe, now 11, walked Adaze down the aisle, her own dress a soft green that caught the sunlight, her star-etched locket gleaming against her chest as she held her mother's hand. Adaze was radiant in a flowing velvet gown, her eyes bright with a joy Chinwe hadn't seen since before. Emeka's death, each step a testament to their survival. Tund stood at the altar, his ivory suit sharp, his crescent birthmark peeking from his cuff as he watched them approach, his smile nervous but warm. The officiant's voice rang out, "Who gives this bride away?" And Chinwe stepped forward, her voice clear, "I do, with all my heart." The crowd's soft applause wrapped around them like a blessing, and as Tund and Adaze exchanged vows, Chinwe felt Emeka's love in her locket's weight, now joined by the new bond she'd forged with Tund. The reception buzzed with laughter. Cola nuts passed among guests, and Chinwe danced with her classmates, her laughter free for the first time in years. But as weeks passed, the glow of the wedding dimmed under the shadow of opportunists, distant relatives from Emeka's village, who'd ignored them during their flyover days, now called with honeyed words, asking for jobs at Tund's Tech Empire or loans they'd never repay. Adazia's cousins, absent when she was ill, sent messages praising Chin's success, their motives transparent. One night, on the mansion's balcony, Chinwe and Adaze sat under a blanket of stars, the city's lights twinkling below. "I don't hate them," Chinwe said, her voice steady but soft, "but they don't get to claim us now." Adaze nodded, her hand squeezing Chinwe's. "We forgive, but we protect what we've built." Tund, overhearing, joined them, his presence a quiet strength. "You're both my family now," he said, "and I'll guard that with everything." Years later, Chinwe, now a poised law graduate at 20, stood in a sleek office at Nigeria's top human rights firm, her locket tucked under her blouse, as she prepared to launch the Emeka Foundation for Street Children. The idea had sparked during her university years, fueled by memories of hunger and the flyover's cold nights, a way to honor the father who'd loved her despite knowing she wasn't his. Tan donated 500 million naira to start it, and in days, now vibrant and healthy, became its ambassador, her speeches drawing crowds to fund shelters and schools for kids like Chinwe once was. At the foundation's naming ceremony, Chinwe unveiled a plaque with Amaka's name, her voice steady as she spoke to a gathered crowd. "He gave me love when the world gave me nothing. This is his legacy." The applause was thunderous, but as she stepped down, her phone buzzed with a cryptic message. "Emeka's past isn't what you think. Ask about his debt." Her heart raced, the joy of the moment dimming as she showed the text to Ades and Tund. Ade's face tightened, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, her voice low. "Emeka wasn't just a teacher. He was in debt to Tund's father, who funded his education. When I was pregnant, he saw raising you as repaying that debt, but it became so much more. He loved you like his own." Chinwe's eyes stung, the locket heavy against her chest. She saw Emeka's sacrifice anew, his pride keeping him silent even as they sank into poverty. Tund placed a hand on her shoulder. "That message isn't a threat. It's a reminder of his honor." Chinwe nodded, a tear falling, but her resolve hardened. The foundation's work grew, shelters rising across Abuja, each one a beacon for children lost to the streets. Chinwe, now Dr. Chinwe Debeo, stood at a gala years later, her suit sharp, her locket still her anchor. Ades and Tund, graying but strong, watched her speak, their pride a quiet flame. A young girl, once homeless, approached Chinwe, holding a drawing of a family her own, pieced together through the foundation's care. Chinwe knelt, her eyes soft. "You're home now," she said, echoing Tund's words from years ago. As the girl hugged her, Chinwe felt Emeka's love, Tund's devotion, and Ade's strength converge. Her life a tapestry of loss and redemption, woven by those who'd never let her fall.